Welcome to another episode of Nuggets with Sauce, the podcast dishing up bite-sized insights you can sink your teeth into, served with a saucy take on common leadership challenges by your host, Michelle Lawrence. Holy cow, I am so excited to be here today this is like my own podcast mustache moment here with Mr. Mustache himself. Super wonderful, super excited to have with me today on this episode of Nuggets with Sauce, my good friend, Bernie DeSantis. No, don't go there. I already did in the background, and just stop right there. Get that just scrub that out of your brain, and we're moving on. Bernie is here today to unpack all kinds of fabulous nuggets with a lot of sauce on the side, I think, knowing the two of us and how we engage in our conversations. Definitely in the space of learning and development today. But before we dive in and start dunking our nuggets, I just want to ask you, first of all, welcome, Bernie. And I want to ask you as a way of introduction to our listeners and viewers, I don't talk about job titles. Let's not get hung up in those. Let's just ask you, what's the kind of the magic mojo that you're bringing to the world? What's getting you out of bed and making you go, today was a great day to make a difference in somebody's life?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me today, Michelle. I appreciate it. Obviously, our first conversation was a bit saucy, and that's the reason why we're here today. It's fantastic. So what gets me out of bed in the morning? I've been doing learning and development for close to 20 years. Got my start, way back when at Quicken Loans, now they're known as Rocket Mortgage. And I was doing experiential learning while I was there and taking people on ropes courses and doing SWAT team trainings, putting people in really stressful situations, 3 stories up in the air, dangling by a little cord. And these were like full day immersive events where, we tied in all of the leadership skill sets that they would use to run a team. Things like problem solving and teamwork and, all the soft skills. But people would go home from those events and then come back to the office on Monday morning. And I would have lines of people at my desk and they'd want to talk about what they took away from that event. Usually it was professional, right? Mm-hmm. I don't communicate well, in the office, or, when I'm put in a stressful situation, I do this. Yeah. But some people would go home and have conversations with a spouse or a child or a parent that they'd been putting off for a really long time. It was really personal. And so when they would come back and give me that feedback, it really lit my fire for learning and development. And right. So I've been training ever since. Yeah. And I absolutely love to pour into people. I love to coach. I love to mentor. I love to help people be better when they leave me than when they came to me. And that's why I get up every day and do it. And now that I own a company where we do training, I get to do less of that, unfortunately, but I get to do more of providing that type of work to other people in learning and development, right? Who, let's be honest, we don't get into this to get rich. We do it because we love to help other people.
Amen.
That's true.
So important that we do that. Now you've got that multiplier effect in
exactly.
Your company, which is awesome. Okay, before we dive into I just know we're going to be going nuts here. It's going to be an explosion of flavors. What's a recommended watch, read, or listen that you've got for our audience today?
Well, I brought this book that a good friend of mine, I can't get it on there with my filter. So it's called The Untethered Soul by Michael A. Singer. My business coach, Bob Russo, recommended it to me. Really, it's kind of about recognizing that, you are a person, but you are also an entity inside of the person, right? And if you pay attention enough, you can look at the world through a whole different set of eyes, right? All the experiences that you have, and you can recognize almost, I guess kind of the best way to put it is like you're almost playing a video game inside of a whole body, right? Like this person is experiencing the world, but you are the consciousness inside of yourself observing this human being experiencing the world. It's really a cool read.
That's
been enjoying it.
Intriguing sounding read. Thank you for sharing that. All right, everybody, check that one out. Fantastic. I know I'm adding to my reading list like crazy this year, and I love it. I always, again, of course, you and I are in that learning space, and we love learning. So pile on more opportunities to learn. Like we're hungry for it. And here we are talking about nuggets with sauce. So let's feed everybody's brain and soul and spirit in this realm of, what can we bring to the table? Because you and I've talked about this. We were just joking before we decided to record here today. It's like, man, every one of our conversations could be a super duper podcast, and maybe that's just how we roll from now on. But
That's cool.
in this space, like, we're thinking about, these are still challenging times. Like, yes, okay, the economy's ticking along. We don't always feel like it's so great. We're hearing a lot of things in the news about layoffs. I'd done a prior episode with Chase and Forehand from HR for You, talking about, like, how do we even get in that place that we're doing those layoffs? But the fear and the frustration, and who is getting laid off and why are they getting laid off, and then how do we, within this space, let's flavor that a little extra with that. Look at our incoming cohort of newest generational workers coming into the mix, and like, what are the drivers and the needs? Let's unpack a little bit there around the drivers and the needs between the, like, who are we dumping if we're deciding to dump our human capital, which is not the greatest thing to do. And then thinking about when we're bringing in new human capital, there's a lot of meat on the bone here. These are supposed to be boneless nuggets, but we're going to put a little meat on the, I don't know, every once in a while, I don't know. I'm where I'm going with this. I'm so excited, but there's a lot in that learning and development space in the middle ground there, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I was talking with one of my fractional chief learning officers earlier today, in fact, and we were having a discussion around all of these layoffs that are happening in these larger organizations, right? They're usually roles where they don't create or generate revenue for the organization, but are still imperative to how that organization operates, right? So people in our space, the learning and development folks, your trainers, your instructional designers, even your leaders, your enablers, they don't necessarily add to the bottom line. So they're being cut. Your marketing people, again, they drive the business forward, new opportunities, but they don't directly add to the bottom line of organizations. And these are a lot of the folks, unfortunately, that are being let go. And I think it leaves us to really wonder, okay, these large global organizations that are laying off thousands of people, again, typically in marketing or learning and development or non-revenue generation, that, keep the business moving forward, what are they going to do?
Right.
How are they going to continue to move forward in their business and do this onboarding or upskilling or leadership development when they've cut off their nose to spite their face?
I love how you said that. Yes, exactly. Like, why are we doing all these things in spite of ourselves? And again, where's the strategy behind this? That, because I get the sense that there's like, we scurried down this rabbit hole and we ran over here and we got all excited and we hired a ton of people without really thinking. We just hit the panic buttons, hire, hire, hire. And then now we hit another panic button and we go, fire, fire, fire.
Yep.
And that pendulum swings pretty hard and smacks you.
Yes,
I think pretty hard in the process. I wonder how many of these organizations are, now that they're stripping back that staff, are gonna turn around again and go, oh dang, wait, where's Simon? Simon used to take care of that.
He's
Well,
gone.
Simon's not here anymore. Gone. Okay, well, and on down the line it goes, right? Oh, no, Rashid used to look after that. Now Rashid's gone.
He's gone. Yeah. No, I mean, we're at a time, if you look at the current workforce that's up and coming into the business world now, this is a generation that they're not going to put up with the same crap that historically we have, right? The dictator style leadership, people who don't want to invest in their people, right? They look at training and development as a necessary evil, right? Just to check the boxes to say that they've done stuff. In a lot of cases, it's just about mitigating the risk, saying that they've done the training.
Yeah, and what's training at that point? It's, check a box bullshit. That's like,
right.
We did training, or like, hey, just go click on some e-learning buttons. We did training. Yeah.
No, and I create e-learnings, right? My company does that, but I'm not a fan of it unless it is stuff that is truly static, right? It's only going to be what it is, and it doesn't need to be redone over and over again. But when I take e-learning, even if it's the most interesting subject in the world, I get to a point where, like you said, I'm just clicking the buttons to get through it.
Yeah.
What are people actually learning when they're taking those?
Well, right.
Nothing.
And that's, the proof in that is, I'll make this argument till, y'all can argue against me, but I'm going to say this. If we thought that e-learning was all the bee's knees and a bag of chips and whatever else you want to call it, then we'd all just be doing that.
Exactly.
And that would be good enough. In fact, shut down all the schools now. We know how wonderful it was to go to remote learning during pandemic.
Right.
I'm married to a teacher, so I really know what that, that was like the least satisfying. Like everybody was up in arms and screaming about how horrendous it was for our kids. And they're not wrong. I mean, it was horrible what happened. It set the kids back. They weren't socializing the way that they needed to socialize. They weren't grasping the skills. Half of them didn't have the tech that they need. I mean, it was a I'm going to say
it was a cluster.
Cluster F. Yeah, big time.
Absolutely.
So we know, and why is it any better? Or, why would it be any different for our adult staffers who, by the way, we're paying full paychecks to them, even if we're only getting partial performance, right? That makes me crazy. So if it's not working for our kids, why on earth would we say that it's actually going to work for our employees? It doesn't. Unless, to your point, I mean, yes, it has a place, but the idea that we're just going to check a box over here and call that learning is not, I agree with you. That's not nearly good enough. It's, it can be a supplement, it can be certain things, but when you were saying like what lit your fire in the first place about learning and what lit the fires of the people experiencing that was it was experiential. That's right. I could take what I learned and I could practice with it. I could do something with it. That's the other thing that you tell me, but I find in this world too, it's like, oh, we think we're going to fix everything by having our staff drink out of a fire hose for an hour on a Thursday afternoon. And we'll call that a workshop.
Yep.
Ouch.
Yeah, no, I mean, far too many companies, unfortunately, take that approach, right? We're going to throw everything in the kitchen sink at them. Some of it will stick.
Sure.
We don't know what, but some of it will stick. And then we'll say,
that's usually what sticks
them.
in the kitchen sink.
Right. Yeah, it's honestly, it's ridiculous. I would say this though, there are a lot of organizations out there that actually do virtual trainings and e-learnings and in-person trainings really, really well. And they create, hybrid type opportunities for people. I think where in the school systems, it really failed over the course of COVID was that nobody was prepared to change to that model. And teachers and students were all just kind of thrust into it because they had to. But nobody actually took the time to take a step back and recognize, how do we do this and do it well?
Right. Let's thread that needle a little further. No, I'm sorry. Let's dunk that nugget in a little more sauce. Follow the mind leap, if you will. So then when we talk about this, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It was like totally caught off guard. Nobody was prepared. Who's got time to prepare for anything? Come on, status quo is the way to go. Let's take that one step back into the work world here, as we're struggling like crazy, or a lot of organizations are struggling like crazy around you talk about the hybrid thing. So am I back to the office? Am I not back to the office? Do I do virtual or do I do in person? If I'm doing any learning at all or any interactivity, everything's learning at the end of the day, but to some degree, but that struggle too. Nobody was prepared. Our managers, our leaders were unprepared and still struggle with that. Nobody gave me the tools and showed me how to use them to say, I'm now operating in an environment with my people where I have to be a lot more deliberate. I have to be a lot more intentional about what I'm doing. How do I make that happen? I wasn't even told what to do when we were all in the office. Yep. And now I'm at a distance. And then again, so compounding those issues, I think that's also part of the pain that we're experiencing.
Absolutely.
Again, I think learning and development can help mitigate.
It absolutely can. Again, if it's done the right way. And really what we're talking about is a bit of a double-edged sword, right? Because there are a lot of companies over the course of COVID and even now that still have remote workforces. They have no intention of bringing them back to the office, because they've recognized that they can get at least the same amount of productivity as they always did when they were coming into the office. But to your point, they aren't doing anything around coaching. They aren't doing any upskilling. They're not doing anything to help people to be better in this mode of working. Then there's the other side of that coin where all of these, you have these companies that are starting to force people to return to the office, right? People who have shown that they are productive and get more done remotely. But then when they come into the office, there's not even enough desks for those people to work.
Right.
Right. They're still not providing any coaching or upskilling to help them to get better, or how to manage their emotions around what they're experiencing. It's just, hey, we have this office building that we're paying for. We need butts in the seats.
Yes. And by the way, or it's like, well, we want you in here to be, interacting more with each other, but half my team is not in at the same time that I am. So how is that any different than what, I mean, I know, I always share the story of a good friend of ours who, is working fully remotely. The company is downtown in the city, and the frustration that he had on at least one occasion where he was told to get his butt, he was under the impression, get your butt down to the building. We're having an in-person meeting. You need to be there. Gets down there, and like half the people aren't in the building, and then they're just doing a Zoom call anyway.
Oh, that would frustrate the hell out of me.
I totally understand like that. Yeah, I would totally understand the frustration of that. And that's half the reason why people, I think, are pushing back on the going back in is, again, are we even, as leaders, are we being deliberate about why and when and how they're coming back into the building? If you're going to make me come into the building, what for? What is going on there that couldn't be done somewhere else?
Right.
Including the ideas of, and yes, we learn from each other organically as well when we have those, like, hey, it's great to run into somebody at the coffee station, or, stick your head over the cube wall or whatever it is where you're working. But we can't turn the clock back to 2019.
Nope.
And I'm not sure that we really even should to 2019, because there were still a lot of things prior to even pandemic that really kind of weren't working well. We still weren't preparing our leaders and our managers for the role. They weren't getting any training on that. We still weren't really training our people as well as we could. There's all these things that weren't going on before pandemic, and then they just got uglier.
Yeah, agreed. I think, the pandemic, it both hurt a lot of people and a lot of businesses because they weren't able to have that traffic flow. They weren't able to have people come together, and that's simply how that business was operated. But, like my business, as an example, we were doing probably 85 to 90% of our training programs in person, right? We would send a facilitator out. They would teach on the topic. People would come into, hotel ballrooms or whatever the case may be. And COVID shut all of that down. So if we hadn't pivoted to virtual, probably wouldn't be in business still today. But it created some great opportunities for Insignia, because so many people, like the school systems, weren't prepared to make that transition. But we had, the expertise to be able to come in. I won't even say expertise. We had the opportunity to come in and make some mistakes and learn and help people to create really solid virtual training programs that people were engaged. They were on camera. They were participating, right? Like all of the stuff that you would want and expect, whether you're in person or virtual. But being that was the only way, some people really leaned into it and did a fantastic job, and others, it was just a have to, and they did what only they had to do to get by.
Yeah, I think that touches a good point too. That's another really interesting nugget, thinking in terms of, we talk in this learning and development space, like one size doesn't fit all. We're not all cut from the same cloth, so to speak. And we need to, there's differentiated learning, there's different learning styles, there's different kinds of intelligences that drive different kinds of learning preferences and approaches. Yes, a lot of us are very visual, like give me something to look at. Some of us are auditory. I mean, I always say, like, you've got to give them something to look at and hear it. If it's a dead silent video, what's the point? I mean, some people need to hear it to understand. So thinking in these spaces, no matter how we deliver it, and I think we should have a variety of modes of delivery and activities and things, because when you think for the vast majority of human history, how did anybody learn anything? They sure weren't sitting in a classroom or a ballroom or wherever that was, right? But it was a lot of, I observe, I watch, I try it for myself, I dig in, I'm given the opportunity, it's apprenticeship kind of style approaches. And you can have 20 years or probably less of really good technology ain't gonna buck thousands and thousands of years of biology.
Mhm.
Uh, just like
Just like
that.
that.
So thinking in terms of, and do any of your clients ever engage on the level of saying like, well, maybe we've never asked our staff how they'd like to learn. Oh, there's an idea. Maybe we should dig
What
in and ask our
what a novel idea.
fancy that. Like, hey, there's a golden nugget right there. Take it and
Yeah.
run, audience members. Like, how about you ask your employees?
Yeah.
Survey.
And it's interesting. I think that most people have they have a preferred learning style, how they prefer to absorb or how to learn something. But there's something to be said about being able to incorporate all of the learning styles, right? That is a truly effective training if you're able to capture all of them. Long before I owned a company that does this stuff, and I learned about adult learning theory and instructional design and all of that stuff. A friend of mine taught me skill transfer, which is how the military goes about creating their training programs, right? So you can teach somebody how to operate a tank, or you can teach them how to disarm a bomb, or you can teach them how to run a sonar or radar. And it's really simple. It's just incorporating those three learning styles: tell, show, do, practice, review.
Yeah.
Super simple.
Yeah. Can you say that again a little slower, please?
Absolutely. The process of skill transfer is to tell, show, do, practice, and review. That's it. It's really that simple.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, that's a great model to be able to say, like, I'm incorporating from different angles, different approaches. And again, and make it interesting for dang sakes. Like, I know this is going to age me and y'all can look it up. I'm sure there's clips on YouTube or something, but like, I don't want Ferris Bueller's teacher up there. God
Good
love
old
Ben
Ben
Stein, but
Stein. He is
I love Ben Stein. But the whole Bueller, Bueller,
yep.
Bueller. No, I mean, that's one of the things that I know you and I are very passionate about as well, is make it engaging. Don't make it drudgery.
Yep.
And treat it like the work that it is. That's the other thing that always blows my mind about, how learning and development is viewed in a lot of organizations. And again, I'm using a broad brushstroke, but as you look at this and you go, how many times have you heard somebody say, all right, everybody, stop what you're doing. We're going to go do a learning thing now. Like, you're going to stop and you're going to go learn, and then you can get back to work. Like, what?
Yep. As
No.
if learning the thing was not part of the job.
Right, exactly. Learning's this thing off to the side that we do that isn't work. And that mindset sets everything up for, a good chunk of failure. Because if I'm not seeing it as work and it's not counting as part of my job, we measure what matters, right? Oh, well, and that's where I think it becomes this like extra or like a weird luxury that companies think that like, oh, and maybe if we ever get around to it,
Yeah.
we'll do learning and development. And yet I saw an article late last year, can't remember what the news source was, but it was something it was astounding. Like, I have 83% stuck in my head. Like, 83% of employees want and expect to get training and learning from their employer.
Absolutely.
And yet, and I can't remember exactly, I want to say it was around 50 some percent, maybe it was maybe a little more than 50%. There was a staggering number of business leaders who really thought that learning and training was just like a joke and a waste of time. I'm terrible at math, but I can like look at that comparative and go like, we have a problem between those numbers.
Right. We are not aligned here.
We are not. Yeah, this is not adding up.
Yep. Yeah.
And
No, it's really interesting that you say that, because I think that, again, this generation that's coming into the workforce now, right, the age of quiet quitting and all of that stuff, right? Like, there is an expectation that the employer that they choose to work with is going to invest in them, is going to worry about their advancement and their career progression. And if, as an organization, you're not willing to invest in your people, those people we'll go find a company that is willing to do so, and they
Yes.
will put you out of business.
Or
It
they'll
is that
start their
simple.
own company and outcompete you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah,
Absolutely.
they're very entrepreneurial, and I'm sure I absolutely agree, and I think that's something that bears repeating. Exactly what you said. If you're not getting serious about this sort of thing, they're going to get serious by walking out the door and finding it somewhere else. If you want top talent wants certain things, and that includes seeing that you are invested enough in them to help them put, as I always like to say, put tools in their toolbox.
That's right.
Give them the skills and the opportunities for experience and
Absolutely.
learning.
Absolutely.
If you don't, they'll go find somebody who will, or they'll just go invent it for themselves and, mop the floor with you.
That's right. But ultimately, Michelle, it comes from the top, right? I mentioned earlier, like the dictator style leadership that, is thankfully now going away, retiring out, passing on, however you want to say it. We're to a point now where we have these expectations, and the speed of the leader is going to be the pace of the pack, right? So if you don't have somebody at the top of the organization who's actively thinking about these things and architecting a culture of growth, of coaching, of learning and development for the improvement of the individual as well as the organization, it's just not going to work anymore. And I don't know that it ever really did. We just didn't have any other options.
Right. Well, and just because we didn't have options doesn't mean that that's okay. Like it's so funny how we don't want to live in the past on a whole lot of other things. I mean, good old days. I don't know about you, but I appreciate access to antibiotics.
Agreed.
And anesthetic for surgery, because the alternatives are pretty ick.
That's right.
Right.
I mean, there was a time when you had to have surgery, they just bash you over the head and hope you didn't wake up,
Yeah, or you just dealt with it and they took your leg off. I mean, right. Like there's certain, so that's why I say, I don't even think we should be hankering to turn the clock back to 2019 or pre-pandemic or whatever. I mean, the cracks were in the system before the pandemic. The pandemic just opened it a lot wider. But absolutely, this is, and this is one of those things that, I mean, there's a training and learning opportunity right there. We have a multi-generational, and have for a while, multi-generational workforce that don't necessarily understand each other, don't communicate very well. And, even providing that level of training and learning and growth opportunities amongst your staff to say like, hey, where do we have differences and why is that taking place? Where do we have a lot of common ground that we can rally around with each other? Like, hello, that is a learning and that's why I said, like, a lot of things are learning that you don't think. I mean, how does anybody know how to get anything done where you work? Right. There has to be some level of training, even if it's crappy training. Somebody's learning it badly.
Yeah.
Or they're not, or they're figuring it out on their own and going rogue, like whatever you like. But the consequences of those kinds of things are pretty profound. And yeah, absolutely. Like smart leaders are going to look at this and like, why would you sit there and, cry about our Gen Zs and say, oh, they're so soft, they're so this, they're so that. Yeah, guess what? They are lacking in some skills. And you know what? So are people who are Gen Xers, and so are people who are millennials, and so are our boomers.
Yep, absolutely.
This is not new. Nope. And yeah, they're younger, so you should expect that they're going to come in the door, and nobody's plug and play. We don't download stuff and automatically go. So why not look at the learning piece as the opportunity to shape and mold the people of your organization into the culture and the vibrancy that you want to see? Like, hey, how do we do things around here? Let me teach you. Let me show you. Let me have you practice that and show me that you get it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I feel like there's still a lot of the, job shadow methodology of training, especially in really small organizations, right? They don't have a well-defined training team or strategy. So they kind of just do what they think is the right thing. Joe over here is a top performer. He hits his numbers every month. I'm going to have you go and sit with Joe. Great. The problem is that Joe, who's been doing this for 10 or 15 years, no longer does it the way that you taught him how to do it. He's figured out every loophole and every way to be more efficient at what he's doing to hit his number. And when you sit that new hire with them, guess what? He's teaching him all of his bad habits. And
Yes.
then they're going to take Sally over here and put him with Bob, who just learned from Joe. And now Sally is going to get all of the crap that Bob learned that
Yeah.
was not effective
Yeah.
in the first
Yeah.
case for Joe.
Right. And Joe was never a trainer in the first place.
Right.
This is what we
Right.
call accidental trainers. Like we have accidental managers, people who got popped into the role. Because like the critical point that and the nugget that I don't want to lose sight of is when you said, well, Joe was our best guy over here, so go learn from him. But Joe, what makes Joe the best guy for doing that doesn't necessarily mean that he can teach it effectively either. And is it really in Joe's best interest to all of a sudden have it? I've seen this happen to people, and all of a sudden it's like, Rashid is the best one. You're our best safety guy. So you're now in charge of training on safety. And like Rashid's having a heart attack. I'm like, how am I supposed to do that?
Right.
Well, just tell him everything that you do.
Tell him what you do. It's fine. You're an expert.
And then everybody falls asleep during safety training because, of course, poor Rashid doesn't know how to do this, and it's not his fault, but he's not a trainer. And so it doesn't engage. It's not memorable. It doesn't stick. We like to call it stickiness.
That's right.
And then he's not loving his job either.
That's right.
And around we go on this yucky little ride that says it's a disservice to everybody. So
It sucks for everybody in that situation.
Want to. And the flip side of that is there could very well be people in your company who would welcome and love the opportunity to step into a teaching and a training environment. Now, help them get there. But if they, again, shock of all shocks, how about we ask people?
Right.
What's something that you're not doing that you would like to do? Or if I have 3 people in a particular function, we always say the old adage is the best way to ruin your best salesperson is put them in management. And a great way to ruin some other great staffers is to throw them into a training role. But if you ask them, sometimes it's not necessarily the best performer who might be the best teacher.
Agreed.
And I don't mean that as a slight against teaching by any stretch, but I'm just saying, like, who's suited for the role.
That's right.
Because that's a different function. And if you don't know how to get that done, or you don't know what that looks like, then dare I say, dear leaders in the audience, you call in people like Bernie and myself who have expertise and a background in how to do things right with learning and development in your company. You don't have to wear that hat.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think people fail to realize, and I do a lot of networking and talking with, small business owners and entrepreneurs. And I think what people fail to realize is that, it's not always about how. It's more often about who has those skill sets, who has that knowledge, and how do you activate it, right? Because to the earlier example, Joe may be a great salesman. Maybe he knows the product inside and out. And maybe you can have him do a small portion of training on product, right? But you're not necessarily going to be able to duplicate Joe's personality. And maybe you don't even want to, because maybe he's, the dirty dish rag like Ben Stein, right? They're a subject matter expert. They know their stuff, but you put them on stage or in front of a camera, that's not where they're most comfortable.
He could be a great resource to help the person, and that's again, another great nugget. Look to your subject matter experts, not necessarily to be the people who are actively dispensing the wisdom and the knowledge, but as the people who know the ins and outs of it. Find somebody else who's more in tune, as you said, like more aligned with the teaching role. You can ask your subject matter experts to say, okay, Joe, you're the best at this. How should this be done? But get somebody with a better inclination to translate his knowledge into something that's actually usable. That's I love that nugget. Dip into that one, because I think that's such a disconnect. And absolutely, in smaller organizations, I get it. Everybody's wearing a ton of hats. And it's like, there's always that dynamic tension of like, we don't have time for this. Okay, but do you have time for mistakes? Do you have time for waste? Do you have time for pissed off customers?
Right.
Do you have time for losses and cost issues? And no, you don't.
Nope.
So, there's an old adage in our world that says, if you think it's expensive to, train somebody and have them quit, what is it costing you to not train them and have them stay?
That's right. Absolutely right. Yeah, there's a cartoon out there, I think, to that effect, right? What happens if we train our employees and they leave? And then the other guy says, well, what if we don't train them and they stay?
Yeah.
Right.
And sooner or later, the other little thing that I really want to emphasize here that I think we've kind of, we've put our nuggets near the sauce, but I want to dip in a bit is sooner or later, this is all going to touch your customers.
Absolutely.
So something about, business problems or people problems, sooner or later, anything that's happening or not happening in your business from a learning standpoint is going to touch your customer.
Yep.
Somebody didn't know how to do their job. Somebody did their job incorrectly. Somebody, whatever, mishandled a situation because they were, they didn't know how to do it, or they weren't trained up enough, or they hadn't had the practice and so on. And it's going to hit a customer and it ain't going to be pretty. Absolutely. Now, the flip side is great training always shows, and customers love that. Of course, they complain more than they praise, but the flip side is you implement some great training and you will see the difference. And the customers will notice we've all experienced that. You ever been to a restaurant where you've had great service and been to a restaurant where you haven't, where the cooking is good or it isn't?
Absolutely.
It shows. We know.
It absolutely shows. Yeah. I mean, now we're kind of delving into a bit of how training impacts quality and service, right, to people. Because if they are not well trained in how to flip the burger even, well, then you're going to have shitty burgers and nobody's going to buy those. And then you're going to go out of business.
Franchise for you, shitty burger. At least we're honest.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, absolutely. I mean, that, I got to say, that is going to be I think our next Nuggets episode. Cause that really does. I hate to kind of leave us dangling on that last nugget as we're kind of running out of time here, but I got to say, that alone let's leave that as the teaser. Let's put your brain on churning on that one, because the quality issue is huge. And it really is the difference between, are you really great and wonderful at it, or are you shitty at it? Whatever it is, burgers or anything else that you're providing.
Absolutely.
This is nuts. But I hope everybody that was listening to this episode today has grabbed onto these really important nuggets. Bernie, thank you so much for joining me today. I know we're going to have you back very, very soon. Love this conversation. Thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thanks for joining this episode of Nuggets with Sauce. I hope we fed your appetite for insights and information on how to improve your business. Be sure to like and subscribe so you never go hungry for more thought leadership.